So one of my most heavily requested videos ever is for short fur, and I do like a short fur tutorial, so I thought that would be what I offered this month over on Patreon. So I thought I'd just give it a little speed up and put a voiceover on it for YouTube, just to give you a little idea as to how I do this. If you want the full length 2-hour tutorial, it is now live over on Patreon, and the link is in the description box below. So initially I'm using Fabriano Artistico hot press watercolour paper. Now I tend to use the 640 GSM. It's the heaviest weight paper I can get my hands on. I absolutely adore this paper. It can take so many layers, and I definitely get the results I want on this paper every single time. So initially I'm starting out by just really mapping out some of the dark areas I can see. Now obviously we are drawing quite light fur, but you'll probably be quite surprised as to how much sort of dark colour does go into this. I really try to build up and put some sort of dark contrast areas as well in, just to make it look quite realistic, because obviously that's the aim. And I really do talk you through exactly what makes a realistic looking sort of fur portrait during this tutorial, with like clumps of fur and making sure your layers are really smoothly blended. So initially I'm going in with the first layer of some Faber Castell Polychromos. This is the cold grey one and the warm grey one, and I'm mixing it a little bit with some of the French grey 10% from the Caran Luminance. Now I often put a little layer of luminance in if I'm going to be lifting any areas off with a slice tool, just to really get those fine details. I find the pencil definitely lifts off a lot easier if I put a wax layer underneath it, and I do that by adding a wax based pencil like the Luminance, and then I can go over it with the Polychromos and really smooth it out. So my aim in these initial this initial layer is to really get a smooth result and make sure that the pencil is really sort of ingrained in the paper. When you're working on a heavyweight watercolour paper, it's quite smooth, but it does have a lot of texture, and the way I try and combat that texture is by really making sure those initial layers are really smooth, and so the pencil over the top, it feels like it glides on rather than sort of just scratches on. And then I go in with start pinning in some detail, and I'm going straight in with some warm grey 5, and I tend to use this as like my mid-tone, even though it's quite dark colour, because I'm using a very light pressure and allowing my fur and my pencil strokes to sort of clump together. I call this like phase, my mapping out phase. I'm trying to really get an idea of where the fur and the direction of the fur is and where it's going to be going, and I like to spend quite a lot of time here just to really try and get a good idea and sort of map out some detail without putting too much detail in. And my aim, I did try to work on this piece as a whole, sort of build it up layer by layer, but I find it quite difficult to do that, so I did end up just going in quite quickly with a darker pencil. This is the warm grey 6, to really try and start building up some of the depth, because then I find it easier to basically keep control over the whole portrait. I know some people prefer to work sort of do a whole area or do the whole thing and build up layer by layer, but I really do prefer to work in smaller sections, and then sort of call an area done, and then move on. It's just personal preference. You've obviously got to find out what works best for you. So I'm really going in and start looking at adding some of the darker shadows now. I'm using some raw umber and some black, and I'm not afraid to go in with a really dark pencil to really get those shadows in and block in some of that darker shadow. I often find that can make a portrait look slightly more realistic if you do block in some of the darker shadows rather than putting every single little detail in. I find that putting too much detail in can sometimes make something look a little bit flat, so I will always aim to try and put some blocks of colour in, and then balance that out with some detail. That's just what works for me. And now I'm going in with a slice tool and just sort of seeing whether I've got enough pigment down to start lifting off, and really getting some of the final details in. Now I use the slice tool to almost give me those little flyaway hairs, and I really liked how this came out in the end. I was really happy, and I hope that it sort of answered a couple of questions, or a lot of people's questions. I did find that one of the things with Fabriano is because you have to press quite hard to get your smooth layers in, it can give you a little bit of wrist ache, so just be aware. But I can't recommend this paper enough. Some people prefer pastel matte, and that's absolutely, you've got to find a surface that works well for you, but I just love the detail and the depth that I can get with this paper. And then, as you can see, even though it's a watercolour paper, the slice tool really does do a fantastic job of lifting up those final details. So I really hope you find this video useful. The full length tutorial is now live over on Patreon, and I hope to see you in the next one. Lots of love. Bye.